So greetings, families and friends, and welcome to another evening of the School of Love. All of you here in the loft, all of you out there in camera land, and of course, those of you doing the review of the video. I want to start off by introducing something you may be familiar with or not, a practice from Heart Math called the Heart-Brain Coherence. Very simple practice, but it's a great way to just bring coherence between the heart center and the brain center. And for this, you just simply take one hand or both hands and put it somewhere that you're comfortable with in the heart area. Just making yourself feel comforted, feel held. So feeling held in the heart area, and now simultaneously, you bring to mind some sort of thought that produces a feeling of happiness, of caring, of gratitude. Might be a memory. We can call it your happy place for now, for this evening. So hold that in mind while holding a heart and sense this coherence between these two centers. Just breathing at a nice relaxed pace to bring the heart and brain into union, coherence, and to bring you into your happy place. And being with your breath just for a bit more. And you can actually stay there if you want as we get into tonight's content. So greetings, families and friends. Welcome to another session of the School of Love. I spent the last session looking at the ego, trying to characterize the ego in different ways, rather than resorting to a dictionary definition. And we also made an important distinction between the ego and egotism. And of course, after all that, you may still be asking the question, so what's the ego? And of course, I can respond with the question, who wants to know? The part of you that asks the questions, it's not your brain, it's not your genitalia. It's in fact this mysterious thing called the ego. So we'll say hello to the one who wants to know. Hello me asking the questions. And you might be glad to hear it's not egotistical for the ego to have lots of questions, even about itself. Not even narcissistic. It's actually a sign of egoic health. The ego is the thing in you, or better yet, is you, that says I. Ego is the Latin word for I. It is the part that can say, I am aware that I am aware I am. I am aware that I am unaware I am. I am aware that I am unaware I am. And literally points with the finger to something in you that is beyond your thinking, your feeling, your will, deeper than your brain, heart, guts. And it's a wonderful thing that our growing ego is still connected to the roots of its childhood, of earlier ages. And in the growing self-awareness, it has lots of questions about everything. What's that? Where? When? Who? Why? And why not? We live in a realm of riddles. And we also live in a realm of answers. As we saw this last session, the ego can have its problems. But the ego is also the bringer of solutions. Paradoxically, the problem and solution are found in the same place. You, in you. And what we've been doing is to dispel some of the confusion and prejudice around the ego due to the bad rap it has been given. Then we can bring the problems the ego presents together with the solutions it presents. Together within itself, within yourself, within your comprehension, which is the only place it can be done. That's where all the action really is, within your egoic activity, where you as a problem and you as a solution meet. And the outer realm of Maya matrix, the space-time as a teacher, simply stimulates your egoic unfoldment. And with the egoic activity, I have a list of 5 functions. 5 functions that identify what the ego is really doing. To be self-aware, to create identity for itself, to make choices, the ego is making choices, to seek freedom, it wants to be free, whatever that looks like for the ego at any given time. And lastly, to love. It's the ego's honor and privilege to have the capacity to love. Now, egotism is a diseased condition of the ego. It's an inflated, exaggerated, or delusional sense of self. Or the opposite of inflation can occur where the ego can shrink and feel undervalued and disempowered by things like shyness, timidity, or hyper-embarrassment, all forms of egotism. The dysfunctional ego may feel itself doesn't fit into society, feels itself a foreigner on the earth even, which could ultimately lead to ending life, such as with suicide. Or conversely, one person's sense of superiority could lead to egocide, ego slaying of another. One person is made to feel inferior and implodes in response to another's explosive egotism. This can be referred to as ego-ruptions, when egotism takes over and the ego is out of control. We've all been on the receiving or giving end of ego-ruptions, when something gets triggered and things sitting under the thin veneer of politeness suddenly come flying to the fore, and a person quite literally blows up. Ego-rupts. These are not necessarily all bad ego-ruptions. It may allow for suppressed content to be released rather than festering in the psyche. This brings me to a personal story. There was a period in my life when I was very involved in theater and wrote a number of musicals. One in particular that pertains to the subject of self-love and ego. The musical opens with an 80s style all-girl glam band, a raucous opening number called Heaven High Hair. At the end of the song, we find out they've been playing to an empty bar, and the waiter tells them it's their last Monday night. They just ain't selling the beer. So the 3 of them, one who goes by the name Party Favor, another called Silent Scream, and the lead singer who goes by the name, they decide to visit Psychic Sue. And Psychic Sue gives a psychic makeover, and at the end of it, has this epiphany that she is Jesus come back as a woman. So, no more Monday nights not selling the beer. They take to the road touring as Jesus and the Divas. which is the name of the musical. Touring to sold-out concert halls, playing to adoring fans who really like the idea of Jesus coming back as a woman and as a rock star at that. But when Psychic Sue sees what's going on and how the psychic makeover has gone awry, she tries to warn Jesus, who's really, that her ego trip could end badly. And Psychic Sue sings to about SHC, which is short for spontaneous human combustion. Spontaneous human combustion is apparently a phenomenon where humans inexplicably spontaneously combust or erupt. And in this case, it's because of overinflated ego that she could suffer from SHC. So I'd like to share the lyrics of the song with you for your edification as well as caution. So it's being sung by Psychic Sue to an up-tempo gospel melody and accompanied by a full gospel choir. Spontaneous human combustion. Spontaneous human combustion, it's no laughing matter. Spontaneous human combustion, it's about human splatter. Spontaneous human combustion, not a glamorous way to go. Spontaneous human combustion when your ego's out of control. It's good to tap the flow and to grow your spiritual self, but pumping it up a little too much may be hazardous to your health. May the force be with you, but hopefully not too much. If your ego's overinflated, you'll look like yesterday's lunch. Oh, spontaneous human combustion, it's no laughing matter. Spontaneous human combustion, it's about human splatter. Spontaneous human combustion, not a glamorous way to go. Spontaneous human combustion when your ego's out of control. You may be deluded and think that you are hot, even though the rest of us may think that you are not. Don't worry, God can grant your grandiosity pardon, but unfortunately, you ain't flame retardant. Spontaneous human combustion, it's no laughing matter. Spontaneous human combustion, it's about human splatter. Spontaneous human combustion, not a glamorous way to go. Spontaneous human combustion when your ego's out of control. Some say a big bang is the way we gotta start. For some, a big bang is the way that they'll depart. One moment you are here, the next you're not. If people are ideas, watch your thought doesn't pop. Oh, spontaneous human combustion, it's no laughing matter. Spontaneous human combustion, it's about human splatter. Spontaneous human combustion, not a glamorous way to go. Spontaneous human combustion when your ego's out of control. When your ego's out of control. SHC. Thank you for a little choir support there. Might have to work on that and take it on the road. So the point of the song is that if the ego becomes overinflated, it may not take much for it to combust, have an ego eruption. And so our identity has to be built on a sound sense of self to avoid the trips and traps of egotism and inflation. And as I pointed out in a previous session, writing from an epistle of Paul, knowledge puffs up the human ego, but love edifies or builds it. Knowledge puffs us up, but love edifies or builds. And if we have faulty knowledge, sooner or later, SHC. Let's take another moment there just for some heart-brain coherence. Again, hand in the heart area, comforting yourself and your mind. Go to your happy place. Might feel some warmth. So understanding the ego has taken up a lot of time in the School of Love, but it's time to go into love land in this session. We took lateral detours into ego land first because we are looking at the human ego as both the bearer of love and the blocker of love, which may be a revolutionary and empowering new concept for you. If love is about inclusion, we have to include ourself in the equation of love. As Oscar Wilde once said, to love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong romance. But in order to have self-love, there has to be a self to love. In the ancient teachings, they put emphasis on the minimization of the ego and individuality. It was about love of family, love of clan, love of nation, love of country first. And the individual came second to society. Society was number one, and the self was there to serve society. The military, the family, to produce more babies, to work the farm or go to war. And you maybe died for your country going to war, sacrificing the self to protect the collective. And some still do this to this day. With this session called the primacy of love, the primacy of self-love, we're talking about a paradigm shift toward the preeminence of the ego in society. The one has become number one. The pendulum has swung, which has been a necessary step in Earth's evolution. One could say this is an intermediate step toward an even greater objective. And we'll talk about that in the next sessions. In the meantime, we've become a society of individuals, less emphasis on the masses, and now time for the cult of the self. The old ideals have acquiesced to the rise of a new ism, egoism. I have my iPhone, my iPod, my iPad, I don't have to work on the farm, go to war, have children, or do anything. I cover my own ass and look out for number one, which is just the ego doing its job, its function, for now. But part of its job is also to love itself, for the ego to love itself, which may sound odd in a culture which is obsessed with self-love, and you're right. But in this session, we're going to look at another kind of self-love, not the narcissistic kind. It's opposite, in fact. Even though we're talking about something as seemingly ephemeral as love, let's approach the subject with sound logic, which I have striven to do throughout the entire class. Logically speaking, in order for there to be love, there needs to be relationship. I and other. But for there to be an I and other, there first has to be an I, which is what we've been talking about all along, the I, ego, self. So we're now talking about the relationship of the self with the self and how to be a bearer of love to ourself. First, the primacy of self-love. And with any relationship, it takes time for love to grow, to overcome blocks. It doesn't begin from a place of love, but love comes. It takes time to get to know another, and in this case, time to get to know yourself. So the question is, in what ways can the ego be the bearer of love to itself, or the blocker of love to itself? In the musical Jesus and the Divas, didn't heed Psychic Sue's warning about SHC. And in the second act, some audience member at the concert who sees through her charade approaches the stage telling her to fess up, that she's not Jesus, and to come clean. She just keeps faking her way through a song called Listen Up and Lighten Up. So the guy threatens her with a gun in his pocket, and he lunges at her and shouts, "Bang!" He didn't actually have a gun in his pocket. He was faking it too. But the shock is enough to put ego over the edge, and she dies of fright. She is literally frightened to death. The fear of being exposed brought down a fear of SHC, you could say, got her in the end. Because the thing that we fear will eventually find us. The thing I want to look at is how fear blocks the ego. There are three ways we automatically react to danger: fight, flight, or freeze. It's interesting that these are all the opposite of warmth. None of them are love. Our inner being can be frozen by fear, or run, or thrash back. Living with fear may not only produce momentary paralysis of the ego, but it could also lead to long-term arrested development. Fear and the ego. If you research fear, you will see there are lists of different types of fear, but apparently there are only two fears that we're innately born with: fear of falling and fear of loud sounds. Other fears are acquired or inexplicable. I like how the word fear is an acronym. FEAR, false evidence appearing real, which is another way of saying illusion. The ego can be held spellbound in fear by illusion, the Maya of life. And as a result, fear can cause us to act in strange ways. It can lead to some of the worst qualities in human nature: greed, jealousy, envy, hatred, rape, pillaging, murder. But ultimately, fear is about fear of death, when you boil it all down. And even though that would appear to be a natural instinct, fear of death, and may be why we fear falling or loud sounds, fear of death may not be necessary, because no one gets out of here alive anyways, so why fear death? In fact, it may not be physical death that is feared, because death is a natural part of life. But the ego fears ego death. Ego death. And this can lead to paralysis and arrested development. This is especially the case when the ego is under the spell of egotism, when it's puffed up and built on shaky grounds. It knows unconsciously it's going to fall eventually. It's going to be humbled. It's going to SHC. The delusional, inflated ego fears being deflated. The ego is its own worst enemy in this way. But there is a better way than just waiting for our ego eruptions. As we know, the truth will set us free. The Matrix movies are all about truth and freedom, and about waking up to the truth in the Matrix being scary. Having freedom can be scary. We see how Neo reacts when Morpheus shows him the truth about the Matrix. He pops and pukes and refuses to believe it. Too much truth too soon is hard to handle and can produce fear. Fear of ego death. And we see how Cypher handles it. After being free of the Matrix for 11 years, he secretly meets with Agent Smith to arrange having his body put back into the power plant and reinserted into the Matrix. He says, ignorance is bliss. And he's willing to sell out all of humanity for it. That's why Cypher really means zero. He was a zero. And he was exemplifying the egotism of ignorance. And that is the way much of humanity is at this time. Blissfully asleep, not ready to wake up, not ready to hear the truth, not ready to handle the freedom of an expanded reality, preferring a reality built out of illusions. The ego is not ready to handle freedom, which we've seen is really the meaning of existence. The ego can't handle the freedom being offered to it, and in fact fears it. It not only fears death, it fears life. Fear of living. Because if you are really living, you fear losing it. You fear ego death. The same could be said about love. People fear love. They fear loss of love. They fear rejection. These are all forms of ego death. And our egotism does not want to experience death of the ego. So where is this leading? What does the ego need to do? It needs to learn how to die. There's only one solution. The ego needs to learn how to die. It needs to learn how to die so it can overcome fear of death and fear of living and fear of loving. Of course, we're not talking about physical death. With that, you have no choice. We're all going to die. We have life, and it's ending 1 minute at a time. We're talking about egoic death. There you have choice. And I've taken to asking people, not how are you doing, but how you dying? How you dying? That's a much more interesting question, if not greeting. Let's take a moment again to do some heart-brain coherence. Hand in the heart area, warming the heart, comforting the heart. Breathing as if you're breathing with the heart. Drawing into the heart with the in-breath. Releasing with the heart on the out-breath. And connecting to your happy place. So this brings me to another favorite movie of mine, Fight Club. When Fight Club came into theaters in 1999, the review made me do something I don't usually do. Run out and see it immediately. The review said it was a meeting of Carl Jung, Iron John, Dr. Jekyll, and Mr. Hyde. Then I did another thing I don't usually do. Went and saw it again the next night. Fight Club is about learning to die. Die to the illusory self. To overcome arrested development and kickstart a real life. It's about self-love. The ego is either the bearer of love or the blocker of love. And the main character, Tyler Durden, played wonderfully by Brad Pitt, puts the power back into people's hands in Fight Club. And even though they spend their evenings blissfully beating the shit out of each other, he is actually loving them like they've never been loved before and restoring a sense of self-respect, self-love. The film is intense. It's about ego death and about bringing down others' egotism as well. It's about stripping the ego back to basics so it can be built with the right stuff, not fluff, not on the shaky grounds of modern identification. It's an interesting film for me because of the similarities with what I do in the spiritual boot camp, to get people in touch with a greater self, to get a vision of the self. The external identity needs to be peeled back so the authentic self can be accessed and built up with the right stuff, not fluff. Later on, Tyler Durden addresses men in Fight Club through a megaphone. Listen up, maggots. You are not special. You are not a beautiful or unique snowflake. You are the same decaying organic matter as everything else. His boot campers are literally digging in the dirt while he's telling them this. The search for the self, the true identity, is starting from the ground up. As an ego being, he's bringing them down to earth, getting them humble with the hummus. It's down on the earth where the ego consciousness can awaken to itself. And he's a master at bringing them down so they can find the true self. In that sense, I like to think of the earth as a lost and found box. Lost and found box, like you had at school to go find your lost mittens. And in this lost and found box of earth, it's a place for three things: self-discovery, self-recovery, and self-relovery. Yeah, I made that word up. Relovery. Self-relovery. Tyler helps them move through the first step to realize that there is more to themselves to discover. You are not your job. You're not how much money you have in the bank. You are not your car you drive. You are not the contents of your wallet. You are not your fucking khakis. The things you own end up owning you. The second step, self-recovery, means that the ego has to be re-educated. The word educate, from the Latin educare, means to lead out. To be educated should result in being led out, not just filled with facts. The ego is led out of its environment and egocentricity to a wider reality and freedom. Education is initiation. And initiations always have an element of risk, to explore the edge between life and death. In Fight Club, we see that when the two characters are driving down a highway and Tyler takes his hands off the steering wheel. The test of courage to see who chickens first. The car eventually crashes, symbolizing another step in the egoic death. Following self-discovery and self-recovery comes self-lovery. This is using love to educate and lead out the ego to reach its fullest potential. Without love, it will never happen, because love is the power of powers. The power we need to love ourselves and lead ourselves out to our fullest potential. But we've not yet fully addressed what love looks like. It can come in many forms. We have to be ready so we will recognize it. because love is a light that wishes to ignite our passion so we can both die and live. An example of this is when the two lead characters go to a convenience store. Tyler Durden pulls out a gun and forces the clerk out back onto his knees in a field behind the store. He takes the clerk's wallet, starts going through it, and discovers Raymond K. Hessel, expired college student ID, and Tyler asks Raymond what he studied. The stunned clerk, after hesitating, hears Tyler cock the gun, then whimpers, "Biology." Tyler presses further, asking what he wanted to be. Raymond, desperate with fear, confesses, "Veterinarian." Tyler takes the driver license from Raymond's wallet and says in 6 weeks he's going to hunt him down in his shitty basement apartment, and if he isn't enrolled in veterinary college by then, he's going to blow his face off so his parents will need dental records to identify him. Raymond scrambles off, shaken. It's an intense scene. And the Edward Norton character, who is known only as the narrator in the movie, is also shaken and requests an explanation for what he has just witnessed. Tyler explains that tomorrow will be the most beautiful day of Raymond's life. His breakfast will taste better than any meal you or I ever tasted. Tyler knows it sometimes takes the threat of death to motivate an ego out of the death trap of meaningless, unmotivated, dead-end existence. Tyler offered Raymond that, kept his driver's license, but handed his wallet and his life back to him. It was an act of compassion to reignite the passion of this convenience store clerk, to get him back on track with his dream, his vision for himself. Because his life had succumbed to the greatest enemy, F-E-A-R, false evidence appearing real, and arrested development. Tyler loved Raymond into once again loving his own life. Love can come in many guises. And in this case, love held the balance between ego life and ego death. So how do we deal with fear? How do we overcome it? Slogans like "no fear" have been popular, but how do we have no fear? Some say the opposite of fear is courage. Just have courage. Just do it. But where does one draw courage from? The word courage comes from the Latin word for heart, curare. Further back, it comes from the Proto-Indo-European word curd, where we get words like cardiac, cardio, and core. It speaks of what lives at the core of our being, in our heart. Not surprisingly, the same place where love lives. Let's do a little bit more heart-brain coherence. Feeling into your heart with your hand, with your mind. Going to your happy place. Breathing that into your heart as if your heart itself is breathing. And then breathing it out of your heart back up into your head. Coherence. There are different kinds of love. In the Greek language, there are different words for love. Eros, or erotic love. Philia for friendship or companionship. Ludus or playful, flirtatious love. Storge is familial love. Agape for universal or divine love. And philautia for self-love. In the Bible, there is a profound line about love written in the first epistle of John. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear has torment. He who fears is not made perfect in love. It says perfect love casts out fear. It says if you have fear, you are not made perfect in love. Not that we necessarily have to base our beliefs on something written in the Bible, but it sounds similar to what we just saw. Courage comes from the heart. Courage instead of fear. And the Epistle of John says, perfect love casts out fear. So can we say the opposite of fear is actually love? Courage in the heart. Perfect love casts out fear. Fear can come from many sources. Jealousy, envy, greed, anger, hatred. Some may think hatred is the opposite of love. But in fact, fear is the opposite of love. Hatred is just a byproduct of fear. Fear is the source of all these other things. But there is one source that will cast all these other things out. Perfected love casts out fear. So it will also cast out hatred and all the other junk taking up precious space in your heart, causing torment. The verse says, there is no fear in love. Perfected love and psychic junk cannot exist in the same space. Perfect love will cast it out. What might perfect love look like? Well, it might look like Tyler Durden. Or it might look like you. I hope so, because we're talking about giving love to yourself with the primacy of self-love. To be clear, when we talk about perfect love, we are not talking about perfectionism. Perfectionism is really an offshoot of egotism, which is a diseased condition of the ego. The Greek word for perfect refers to something that has been worked with, developed, matured. In a sense, it has been refined and purified. It's pure, so I like to refer to it as perfect love. Perfect love casts out fear. And we are to perfect our love. The work of the ego is to work on the perfection of love within itself, and thereby work on the perfection of itself, as it identifies with perfected love instead of being full of fear. So how does perfected love apply to self-love? To love yourself, you need to be in relationship with yourself. Are you in relationship with yourself? Have you got to know yourself? Does the thought of getting to know yourself produce fear? As with any relationship, you get to see things you don't necessarily like. Warts and all, flaws and all, bozo and all, whatever turns you off. Good. Why good? Because this is where love comes in. This is where pure-affected love comes in. This is where courage kicks in. The courage to free yourself from egotism and become a freego, a free ego. This is about learning how to die with a capital D. How you dying? To learn how to die an ego death in contrast to SHC, or ecocide, or suicide. There's another relevant verse in the epistles about dying. I beseech you that you present your body a living sacrifice. Present your body as a living sacrifice. It's speaking about living, dying, so we can truly live. And the following line says, and be transformed by the renewing of your mind. We're talking about being transformed by learning how to die while alive. So with the primacy of self-love, the title of tonight's session, instead of the kind of self-love you might be thinking of, like, hey, go for a bike ride, stop and treat yourself for an ice cream, maybe get a mani-pedi along the way. No. We want a self-love that reaches into the depths and brings about a complete metamorphosis of our entire being, which requires working with the powers of life and the powers of death, both under the auspices of the power of powers, pure effect love. If pure effect love casts out fear, and fear is the result of a whole host of egotistical things in you, we're looking at self-love as a cleansing of the temple of you. So the real you has a perfected place to live and love. A little more heart brain coherence. Breathing with the heart. Going to that happy place. At this point, you may be wondering if this is at all necessary. Or perhaps you may be denying that this is necessary as a part of life. Denial. As the architect of the Matrix points out to Neo, denial is the most predictable of all human responses. Or you may feel defensive, feeling that others are at fault for things, not you. You may feel accusatory, perhaps even retaliatory, defensive. Or embarrassment. Perhaps you feel embarrassment as you reflect on your own egotistical ways, flaws, the fact that you're not as perfect as you like to think you are. And perhaps there's even a sense of rebellion around this. The answer is simple. Stop lying to yourself and start loving yourself. Stop lying to yourself and start loving yourself. Don't compound one loveless act with another by lying to yourself. Don't block love when you are meant to be the bearer of love. If you are blocking, then you're really blocking the real you from coming through by your own egotism, your own worst enemy. You have freedom of will, of course. You can choose the red pill or the blue pill. At the end of this program, we can even make arrangements to have your body put back into the power plant and to be reinserted into the matrix. If that's your wish, your choice. In the meantime, don't miss out. Don't miss out on you know who. You know who. The story I wrote for the musical Jesus and the Divas was actually partly autobiographical. I had an episode at age 20 where I thought I was Jesus. I thought I was the second coming of Christ. I was flying a little too high on some substance use and messing with magic, which lasted for a few months, and I had an ego trip that ended in SHC, spontaneous human combustion, after which I looked like yesterday's lunch. And that lasted for a few years as I put myself back together. The ego is a funny thing. It's a funny thing to have, and it's a funny thing to be, because it's meant to be a free being. So these sorts of episodes of free flights and free falls can happen to us all, if not careful in managing ourselves. As Goethe said, the human being errs while it strives. The human being errs while it strives. Wisdom is gained by making mistakes. They say confession is good for the soul. So I'd like to confess another bozo error in my life. A rather terrible thing, actually. I once told a woman I wanted to marry her and have children with her. But I knew inside I didn't really want that. And it wasn't the right thing for either of us. I knowingly told a very big lie. I lied so I could get something I wanted from her. I wanted pleasure. I tricked her, and it caused her pain. In the end, it caused me a lot of pain too. That was a long time ago, and I eventually went through a process of coming clean and apologizing to her. And of course, it was humbling to have to do that. But until I did, I realized my egotism was blocking me, blocking other things in my life, other relationships, including the relationship with myself. Ironically, my ego wanted love from her, and it lied to try and get it. In the end, I did the loving thing. I came clean. It was an act of self-love. How is it that a person can tell a lie like that? Actually easy. Even though you may think you're a smart person and a good person, you still live in the Maya matrix and are subject to the illusions and trickery. The game is always on, and there's no such thing as a spiritual vacation. The ego is a driving force of nature. The ego wants what the ego wants until it realizes it's not what it wants. Then it wants something else. Eventually, it realizes it wants the truth. I finally woke up to the truth and then forgave myself for living a lie. So what we're heading toward here is a self-forgiveness as self-love ritual. And learning to die through love so that we can live through love. Perfected love. So we're going to look at a two-part ritual to release the false and faulty things of the self and to receive more of the authentic self. This is something I learned to do early on in my spiritual seeking. It's called R&R for the ego. R&R for the ego. Release the past to receive the future. R&R. This is a two-part contemplation, which we will look at over 2 sessions. The first half this evening is the releasing. The second half, which we'll look at the next session, is the receiving. And the reason it's done over 2 sessions is because there are 2 currents of time. 2 currents of time, which I'll explain a bit more in the next session. But the past and the future are a duality. And the ego stands in the middle of it and mediates this duality of past and future. And there's a creative tension between past and future. And how the ego creatively resolves this tension determines the qualities of any present moment. The first half of the ritual is a self-evaluation exercise, or you could say background check on your ego, as I just demonstrated in my personal sharing. But in your case, it is something you are to keep private. Just you and yourself. And in doing this, we need to remember that the ego is not all bad, as some paradigms suggest. It's actually working for you. It's working for you when it's not working against you, right? You simultaneously hold the problem and the solution within yourself. And one of the things that stops us from loving ourselves or others is, in a word, forgiveness. Forgiveness. So we want to look at 2 aspects of forgiveness. Firstly, forgiving yourself. And secondly, forgiving others. Both are ways to self-love. In the first case, it's obvious. We want to remove any blocks to self-love that shame, guilt, condemnation may pose. In the second case, in forgiving others, we want to remove blocks in ourselves that holding anger and resentment towards others may create. In both cases, we're holding toxic emotions, which are not good for us and are not self-loving. So this contemplation we will look at today has 2 parts. The first part is about forgiving yourself. The second part about forgiving others. With regards to forgiving yourself, it is to acknowledge and forgive yourself for the not so loving things that you've done. The not so loving things that you've done. When you didn't act out of the highest love possible at that moment. It's a love assignment. And it's best to really dive into this and milk the process until you have nothing left to hide from yourself or others. You'll be stronger, clearer, and less vulnerable as a result of it. In the second part, you'll think of people you need to forgive. In doing this, it is good to remember people need to be loved the most when they deserve it the least. I'll repeat that. People need to be loved the most when they deserve it the least. And if you can't forgive someone, if you can't forgive them, then there may be something else to look at. Perhaps some sort of reconciliation process that needs to be done. Or one might need to look if one is caught in an ego trap of victimhood. The trap of victimhood is where the ego actually gets inflated with ideas like, only I'm the one who sees what's going on and how bad it really is. A sense of ego inflation. There can often an inflated sense of self-importance and egoic satisfaction. There can even be a sense of pleasure in getting special treatment as a victim. So a victim stays stuck rather than truly seeking resolution for itself, because they're milking the pain for egotistical pleasure. They can even become addicted to this, where a person actually seeks pain and victimhood because they see a benefit in it. This is very self-sabotaging. It also points to how a lot of addiction is rooted in egotism, a diseased state of the ego. If there has been some serious offense between you and another that needs to be acknowledged and dealt with, there may be other work to do. I sometimes sit and mediate with pairs or groups of people, or refer them to resources to help them process. If you feel injustices committed are needing more formal process of mediation, there are lots of resources online or through professionals who deal with this sort of thing. One such guideline is something formulated by the United Nations, the UN, which I like to refer to as UN. They formulated guidelines for undoing injustices, committed on a global scale, but can be adopted at the personal level. The guidelines help bring about a restitution between countries or groups, steps for undoing injustices. And it boils down to these basic steps: restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and guarantees of non-repetition. I have my own 5 steps, which I teach in my Skilled Friends program, and we'll post these in the email that I send out, as well as along with the video. And these are the 5 steps to getting back up. Recognize. Recognize what you've done. Do you see it? 2, acknowledge it. Do you actually admit it to yourself and others that you have committed this thing? Number 3, apologize. Speak up about it. Make an apology. Number 4, make amends. Amends means to take action for it, to fix it. And number 5, restitution. Restitution, lay it to rest with restitution, so there's a sense of closure. It's done. So as you look at things in your life that you want to acknowledge and forgive yourself for, you may want to write them down on a list so you can follow up with the other, if that is a possible step. And then you can burn the paper when that's done as part of the releasing, the restitution, and the closure. So now comes the hard part, the actual doing it. The releasing of things from our past, the identifying and forgiving of ourselves for the not so loving things we have done. So to make this egoic death a little easier, I've got words of self-forgiveness to contemplate. What's essential and what makes it the hard part is getting honest with yourself, so you can come clean of your past, to come clean of what you've done. And to do this, we need to be constantly reminding ourselves that the motivation for doing it is to receive and manifest a glorious future. So there's an element of going down before going up or growing up. One might even think of the image of John the Baptist, who baptized people in the River Jordan, helping them to release the not so loving ways of their past so they could receive what was coming. Jesus himself was baptized by John and even engaged in this gesture of going down, humbly going down into the waters to be cleansed. But that was just the first step. Following the down gesture is the coming up to receive, which he did and was symbolized as the pure white dove descending on him, symbolizing the receiving of a purified spirit, perfected love. That will be the second part of the ritual in the next session. So that image is a template you can use if that imagery works for you. So we will go through this contemplation together to get comfortable with it and see if there are any questions. Then this will be your love assignment for the week. And we can even look at it after the break during the discussion, Q&A, and love assignment. So let me first read the self-forgiveness contemplation. Contemplation to forgive myself. May I be strong enough to be humble in acknowledging and releasing the ways in which I have gone against nature, gone against the nature and harmony of my greater self. I forgive myself for the harm I have created through this lack of greater self-awareness. I give love to myself by forgiving myself. I forgive myself for not loving and respecting myself more, for wasted time, wasted energy, wasted money, living in ways not infused with love, forgetting about my freedom and living without motivation. I release the not so loving thoughts, feelings, and actions I have committed in my past that are not me, but were the part of me I identified with temporarily. As I come clean of this egotism, I now identify with love, a higher love, that I may receive the gifts of the future from a more aligned and courageous center, and live with a more perfected love, including the primacy of self-love. May I bloom in the true light of who I am. Selah. And the word Selah appears in the book of Psalms of the Old Testament as a musical notation, signaling the end of a phrase or a contemplation. Now I'll read the second contemplation, forgiveness of others. Forgiveness of others is something emphasized in the Christian tradition. Jesus teaching his followers to turn the other cheek rather than strike back when someone offends you. So a ritual to forgive others is an opportunity to let past hurts go. Cleanse your temple of toxic emotions. Cast them out so perfected love can take its place. So here are the words to contemplate the forgiveness of others, which I will also post. I release and forgive others who have affected me from a place of not so loving thoughts, feelings, and actions. May they too acknowledge and seek forgiveness for this, and seek greater union with their greater self. So there may be less harm and more harmony in the world, healing the past in the present, and opening the door for a glorious future. Selah. So we just looked at the release step, and we'll look at it again after the break to see comments and questions. And we'll do the receive part in the next session. But this is meant to be an acquired skill, not necessarily a one-shot deal. There's not only the releasing and receiving, there is the ongoing work to identify and overcome all aspects of egotism that block love, so that we can grow in our role as bearers of love, to be transformed by the renewing of our mind, and to further our metamorphosis, working with the power of powers, the power of love. And as we go into the break, for your musical edification, we're going to hear just that by Huey Lewis and the News, The Power of Love. And please notice Agent Smith is smoking on the bass guitar in the background, reminding us that the My Matrix is ever present, even with the power of love. All right, welcome back to part 2, the School of Love, our session here on the primacy of self-love. And I thought I would play that song, Huey Lewis and the News, The Power of Love, with Agent Smith there playing the bass in the background. You know, just to keep some levity in the space, because tonight, you know, we've taken it a step further, looking at self-love, not as bike rides, ice cream, and mani-pedis, but bringing about ego death and the complete metamorphosis of our being. So maybe that's a surprise to some of you, and we want to open up for some conversation around this subject.
And it really spoke to me because I don't know if I understood correctly how you said that is even when it's undervalued, it's also the ego. And that really spoke to me because, as you know, I had that problem, the undervalue. And you also mentioned about the depression, and I have awful battle with depression for long in my life. So that's also the ego, when you just diminish yourself so much that you have no value. That's also, I didn't understand that until that class that you were saying, that also is an ego. It's not also when you inflate it and you think you're better than everybody else, but it's also the opposite. So yeah. that spoke to me. Let's say that.
Very good, Anazeka. Thank you for highlighting that point, because that's a point that's often overlooked by people. And this is really key to understanding how the ego is a mediator that stands in the middle of all dualities, including too much levity, too much gravity within its sense of self. And, you know, the concepts kicking around about egotism are kind of skewed and blurred. So yeah, I've had the joy to really try and concretize what this is about and see that the ego suffers from egotism, a disease state or condition of itself, which can be being too high, too overinflated, you know, delusional in that sense, or too compromised, living under too much of a heavy superego of somebody else or society, where it doesn't feel value, doesn't feel its worth. And it can be up and down like a yo-yo. You know, some people go from the state of being like over the top to being like in a shoebox. So thank you for pointing that out. That's something that we're going to move forward with in the next couple of sessions as we start to build edify the ego with some sound sense of self based on truth and not on the mirroring of Maya. And this is all around this concept I introduced today, or maybe I've done it at other times, about education or re-education of the ego. Educate is educare in the Latin, means to lead out, to come out from what? The eggshell egocentricity of an immature ego or arrested development ego, to lead ourselves out, to love ourselves out into the full potential we have as an I am aware ego being. So that's why this is called the School of Love, really pointing to how the school of life is the school of love. This is why we are here, to educate the ego through love and the purification of our love. How did you like that word? I conflated the two together of perfect and purify into purification. There should be no, you like that? All right, MGM. There should be no baggage around that. You know, the word perfect has baggage, you know, like I'm supposed to be perfect. Well, no, perfectionism is another ism. It's another disease of the ego, trying to be perfect or thinking you're perfect or they're more perfect than me. You know, how can anybody be more perfect than another? You know, perfect is perfect, but we're not talking about perfect. We're talking about a process of purifying our capacity for love, to be of a higher grade of love. It's really an alchemization of our being, taking something of a raw base state and through alchemization to bring it to a higher place and capacity. And it's not that we don't have high value at the beginning. We have high value all along. It's just, you know, you wouldn't say to a child that you're worth less than grandpa. Not at all. They both have the same value, but different capacities. And there's a growth process that we need to go through in the educare, education, leading out of the self into the greater self. So you like that word, purification?
It sounds like a fancy brand of cat food.
Oh,
which is
mute yourself, will you? Mute yourself right now.
Which is fine. I mean, cats perfect, right? Anyways,
I'm gonna edit that comment out. Just letting you know right now.
Anyways, Jesse, let's go to the point. I want to bring something I read from somewhere else to what you just said about, you know, people can be perfect, but in their own way to be perfect. So this is from Truth Unity, from Eric Butwas. He once was saying that being perfect is like, you know, if you have a piece of carbon, you can't expect its perfection would be the same as the perfection as a piece of metal, because one is electrical conductive and one is not. So he said, then for the piece of carbon, the perfection looks like it being a light bulb, so that exactly because it is not electrical conductive, that's why it can become this generator of light. Because, you know, it's not conductive, then it heats up and then it becomes light. Whereas, you know, a piece of metal would seek its perfection, for example, being the outer shell of an automobile or something like that. Yeah, like what you just said about the idea of purification, I think resonate with what I was hearing from Butworth, because in his narrative, different materials with different properties seek different forms of their perfection instead of seeking some kind of unified template of perfection that does not resonate with the innate property of the material. Of course, people are much more versatile than, say, a piece of carbon, a piece of metal. I'm not saying that, okay, then people are just like light bulbs that they cannot change. I mean, people have much more flexibility. They have much more freedom to shape themselves, let's just say. Nonetheless, the idea is that even if people have such vast freedom of shaping themselves, the same principle applies, I believe, that if they have chosen to take on one form, then this form itself has its own blueprint of perfection that an individual can bring out from the original form to the next form, to the next form, to the next form. It's a process of metamorphosis. Whereas the perfectionism society would like to proclaim really has no metamorphosis. It doesn't matter which form you start with. I just give you the end form, and everyone needs to be like that. There is a universal standard for things, which to some people may be an attractive idea, but I just want to point out that that will be directly contradictory to the metamorphosis of forms and perfection in the process rather than in the end product. Yeah, that's a mouthful.
Right. Yeah. Well, let me mirror that a little bit, or put my own spin on it as well, because you're pointing to an important thing, in unjacking ourselves from the matrix, right? Because people look at the Maya matrix illusion, and if they're not living as an independent ego being, then they end up just copying what is there. Or we could more correctly say, Agent Smith copies onto the individual something of its own program. And we see a lot of people are just running programs that they've jacked out of the matrix. Like everybody walking around wearing black from head to toe. It's like a program that everybody's got copied onto them by the system, right? And people, they want to be liked, they want to be loved, they want to fit in, they don't want to feel like a foreigner on planet Earth. So, but, to be a strong ego is to recognize exactly the opposite of what Tyler Durden was saying. He was shouting at them through his megaphone saying, "You are not a unique and beautiful snowflake." But in fact, he meant the opposite. He was planting the seed in what he was saying so that ultimately in the story, they recognize they are a unique and beautiful snowflake. That everybody has that uniqueness that you're talking about, that through process, we can unpack. And you're kind of foreshadowing to the next session, which is called the seed of love and receiving the seed of love, where through love, we can unpack our uniqueness. That there is a commonality in love and in the universe and whatnot, but then there's infinite diversity. And we have the honor and privilege to unpack that uniqueness as beautiful and unique snowflakes. So time to unjack from the matrix and find our own voice, our own expression of ourself that's there, that there's something there already. There's your own code, you could say. I don't want to get too mechanical about it, saying your own program, but there is something of a code there for you to connect with, to work from in the expression of self. Yeah, anyone else want to pick up on that? All right. MGM.
Hello, everybody. Yeah, I just wanted to share before I say something about being an authentic self. Just an experience I had after last week's love assignment. By the way, Jesse, I really love the heart exercise you gave us last week, and we did today too. The
Heart brain coherence from
yeah,
heart math. Mm-hmm.
yeah, that had a huge impact from the moment I did it last time. And one of the loving things I wanted to do last week was to go out and do my errands while I remained in tune with my heart, while I remained in coherence with my heart. And I did it, and I've never felt calmer, and I never saw, it was like the whole world was extremely beautiful. Everything was so just beautiful. And I've had these experiences before. I mean, it's a normal, irregular thing for me to notice beauty. But this was a different kind, a different level. And after I got home, I decided I just wanted to stay in my heart. And I don't know why I never had this idea of having the seat of my consciousness in my heart. And when I realized, I'm mostly in my head. That's where, when I think of I, or when I think, when I tune into myself, that's the first thing I notice is my forehead, inside my brain. And I never thought, I could just drop and stay in my heart all the time. And so I did it. I stayed, and I kept waiting for my old habit, to come back. And it wasn't coming back, and it was surprising me. And after, I think, a week, it sort of started slowly. I could feel in that moments where, okay, I'm not feeling my heart anymore.
Can you go there now?
Pardon?
Can you go there? Can you go into that state? Can you tune into that state?
I'm there now. I'm there
now. Okay. Can you go be there now?
Okay.
And can we tune into you?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So you tune into that state, that
Okay.
resource state that you're have created. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do heart brain coherence and tuning into your field, to the state that you're in. Just going to do this for a moment to experiment.
Okay.
So your intention on Myra. So you breathe with your heart. Your intention, your third eye, connecting to her and her state. Say something, Myra, so your picture comes up again.
Oh, hello.
There you are.
I feel it's expanding right now.
The power of numbers with the power of love is the power of powers.
Wow, I feel like, like that.
Anyone else? What is anyone else feeling here? You're there.
Like a pink daisy. I can visualize a pink daisy, and the petals are all opened up.
Michael feels and sees a pink daisy with the petals all opened up.
That's beautiful. Daisies are very important to me. And pink too. I
Got your
love
pink
pink.
hat on. You got your pink bloom on. Michael didn't even know that you had your pink bloom on.
Oh,
Crown chakra.
he's feeling me.
We all are, aren't we?
We all feel you.
Yay!
To be able to rest upon that is certainly a mighty gift. We're not meant to be just island egos. We're working on our individuation, but that's an intermediate step, as we'll see in the next sessions. We're already gearing into the future here.
Thank you so much. Beautiful hearts.
Because this is really central, what you're bringing up. The thing that's going to carry the day in terms of going from, you could say, 0 to hero within our own lives and playing it out on earth with one another. This verse from the first epistle of John says, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear has torment. He that fears is not made perfect in love." So this perfection or purification, our love, is really what we're seeking. And what we've emphasized today is that it's not about self-indulgence and loving ourselves, but really bringing ourselves through a death process. That the way through is not through denial, avoidance, pretending, and all of that, but to learn how to die as an ego being, to bring about our own initiation and activation through the practice of egoic death, which sounds heavy, but we have to keep our eye on the prize. We have to keep looking to the future and how that simply cracks open the egg or the ego to allow us to receive really the great gift of life, a higher life, beyond the lower ego to the greater ego. So, this idea of egoic death is not something new. It's something that's been practiced in temple initiations and all sorts of initiations throughout the ages. How do we do that in today's context is an important question, because it's really lost in a way as a concept for living. How to bring about death and rebirth. So this is why, I'm going to come around to repeating what we looked at the end of first portion there of self-love. Self-love with perfect love is to come clean. To learn how to come clean from the things we're hiding from ourselves, we're hiding from others, to get rid of that shroud of illusion and self-deception. The things that we did in the past from a place of lesser consciousness, lesser love, to be able to release those, to let those go, and the toxic energy and emotions around that, to clear the way to receive something greater. And we can come clean. We can let it all go. We don't have to hold on to that baggage. The only thing that holds on to that egotism is egotism itself. Contemplation to forgive myself. Was there any questions regarding that? This is something that you can print off, and it's basically a contemplation. People might want to light a candle or burn incense or whatever to create an atmosphere of purification, perfection, to create the kind of state that Myra was indicating, where she's in the heart, she's in love, And it's a sustaining state. It's something that's sustaining her. But the main key is really to contemplate this and to let the words carry you through to a sense of release and letting go. And of course, you're going to want to be specific about what you're releasing. So to take a piece of paper, write down the things that come to mind. Milk it right down to the bottom of the bottle so that you feel it's all gone. There's nothing else that's going to come back to try to get an upper hand over you. This is going to make you less vulnerable to your own past, your own memories. So I'll read through it and then you can have some paper to start to release onto the paper, to get it out of yourself onto the paper. And at some point, you can burn that paper as a symbolic gesture of the release and preparation to receive. So the contemplation to forgive myself. May I be strong enough to be humble in acknowledging and releasing the ways in which I have gone against nature, gone against the nature and harmony of my greater self. I forgive myself for the harm I have created through this lack of greater self-awareness. I give love to myself by forgiving myself. I forgive myself for not loving and respecting myself more, for wasted time, wasted energy, wasted money, living in ways not infused with love, forgetting about my freedom and living without motivation. I release the not so loving thoughts, feelings, and actions I have committed in the past that are not me, but were the part of me I identified with temporarily. As I come clean of this egotism, I now identify with love, a higher love, that I may receive the gifts of the future from a more aligned and courageous center, and live with a more perfected love, including the primacy of self-love. May I bloom in the true light of who I am. Selah. Spontaneous human combustion, it's no laughing matter.
Spontaneous human combustion.
It's about human splatter.
Spontaneous human combustion.
Not a glamorous way to go.
Spontaneous human combustion.
When your ego's out of control.
Spontaneous human combustion.
It's no laughing matter.
Spontaneous human combustion.
It's about human splatter.
Oh, spontaneous human combustion.
Not a glamorous way to go.
Spontaneous human combustion.
When your ego's out of control. Verse
Oh,
1, it's good to tap the flow and to grow your spiritual self.
Hey,
But
hey,
pumping it up a little too much may be hazardous to your health.
hey,
May
hey.
the force be with you, but hopefully not too much. If your ego's overinflated, you'll look like yesterday's lunch. Oh,
Spontaneous human combustion.
it's no laughing matter.
Oh, spontaneous human combustion.
It's about human splatter.
Spontaneous human combustion.
Not a glamorous way to go.
Oh, spontaneous human combustion.
When your ego's out of control,
Oh,
you
oh.
may be deluded and think that you are hot, even though the rest of us may think that you are not. Don't worry, God can grant your grandiosity pardon, but unfortunately, you ain't flame retardant.
Spontaneous human combustion.
It's no laughing matter.
Spontaneous human combustion.
It's about human splatter.
Spontaneous human combustion.
Not a glamorous way to go.
Spontaneous human combustion.
When your ego's out of control.
Hey.
Some say a big bang is the way we gotta start. For some, a big bang is the way that they'll depart.
Okay.
One moment you are here, the next you're not. If people are ideas, watch your thought doesn't pop.
Oh, spontaneous human combustion.
It's no laughing matter.
Spontaneous human combustion.
It's about human splatter.
Spontaneous human combustion.
Not a glamorous way to go.
Spontaneous human combustion.
When your ego's out of control.
Hey.
Spontaneous human combustion. S-A